Joining me here in studio, we have Catherine Rampell, economics editor at The Bulwark and, of course, co-host of the Weekend Primetime right here on MS Now. Also joining us, we have Ankush Khardori, former federal prosecutor, now senior writer with Politico magazine. Can I ask you quickly what we heard from the president there, Catherine? What did the president mean when he said he can destroy another country?
That is not an economic question, but I think he means that he can do whatever he wants. He thinks that he is not constrained.
He said that. I can do whatever I want.
He is not constrained by the Constitution or Congress or inspector generals or, for that matter, the Supreme Court, as it turns out.
So what do you see as the immediate impact of this ruling, the going from 10% to 15% within a matter of 24 hours?
The real question is why he didn't do 15% yesterday, honestly, because the law that he is referencing to impose these new tariffs, to replace the tariffs the Supreme Court said that he cannot impose, that allows for a maximum of 15% taxes,
right.
Tariffs or taxes
right.
for the next 150 days. So I don't know why he didn't do it to begin with. He's not a guy who's known exactly for being a policy wonk or for doing his homework. So maybe he just said 10% sounded really nice. And then somebody told him, psst, you can actually make it higher. And he did. I don't know. But, you know, the Supreme Court really handed him a gift here. He did not have to impose tariffs of 10%, 15%, any other amount. He could have just said, you know what, we are going to accept this gift from the Supreme Court, which is effectively cutting taxes for Americans and
then run with it.
And run with it.
Yeah.
And the refunds that will be due or should be due, that's a whole other question, to the businesses that have already remitted these taxes. That's going to be a nice shot in the arm, a nice stimulus for them. He could have just said, thank you. I appreciate it. We are now going to have our golden age of the economy that I have been promising because we are going to get our boot off your necks. And instead, of course, he decided to try to reconstitute those taxes and effectively punish not just foreign countries, as you pointed out, but American consumers as well.
For sure. Ankush, is this new tariff move by the president constitutional or will it face legal challenges?
Well, look, I and many other folks have been following this issue expected this Section 122 tariff to kick in immediately. Catherine's right. It could have been immediately gone up to 15%, as well as all the other authorities they've been referencing. The problem, there may very well be challenges. One is that the statute refers to a balance of payment deficits as a triggering mechanism for this tariff authority. Trump has referred to trade deficits. Balance of payment deficits are not exactly the same thing as trade deficits. Now, I'm sure Catherine could speak more articulately about that than I could, but it's just to say that I could envision a challenge where someone says, well, no, actually, you can't justify even these tariffs on the theory that you've articulated. But trade courts tend to be quite deferential and could even be deferential on an interpretive question like that in favor of Trump. But that's just to say it is a potentially litigable issue. And then, of course, there's going to be this question about, well, what happens after the 5-month period runs up? Because this provision only allows a 150-day period without Congress re-upping it. And I think Trump maintained a little bit of wiggle room on the question of whether he can just re-up 150-day successive periods without having to go to Congress. Now, I think if we take a very big step back from all this, I think that, I think Catherine zeroed in on an important point here, which is this is now sort of firmly, I think, back into the political policy realm. Trump has been claiming for the last year, absurdly to my mind, that he has this unlimited unilateral authority that somehow Congress gave to him in this tiny little statute. All of his authority for imposing tariffs comes from the Constitution and congressional authority. That means if he goes forward with any of these tariffs, even today's, it is only going to be possible with the implicit blessing of Republicans in Congress. They could stop and repeal any or all of the tariff authority he's going to be using.
There's a big question whether they will do that, and it's because of this reason, Catherine, because if we look at the numbers of disapproval, it's 64% right now of Americans who say, we disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling tariffs, likely because consumers are paying the bulk for them. It is not foreign countries, as the president has insisted repeatedly. So how might this ruling change the overall dynamic?
Yeah, it turns out Americans are upset about affordability. Gee, I wonder why they might then disapprove of policies that make things less affordable, which is exactly the case here. Again, tariffs are taxes. There have been a bunch of studies from the Congressional Budget Office, from researchers at the New York Fed and elsewhere, finding that the vast majority of these tariff costs are being passed along to regular Americans. 90%, 95%. You know, there's some margin of error there, but it's the vast majority of these costs. So, of course, Americans are upset by this. And in fact, there were numbers that came out today from the Yale Budget Lab finding that if you include these new 15% tariffs from today, I think the typical American household is paying something like an additional $700 over the course of just that 150-day period because of the totality of Trump's tariffs. So, yeah, Americans do not like these tariffs. They are making life much more expensive. And I don't understand why Trump is deciding to double down on all of this, given that people hate them. They are expensive. They don't really seem to be achieving whatever concessions he claimed they would be achieving. And the other piece of all of this is that his negotiations with other countries, that are supposed to extract these painful concessions from other countries, maybe they could have worked out this cudgel would have been effective anyway, when Trump could, on a whim, impose tariffs. But the fact is, these additional tariffs that he's putting in place, to reconstitute or backfill the ones that were vacated by the Supreme Court.
Deemed illegal.
Yeah, right. Deemed illegal, unconstitutional, in fact. Those require a lot more process. They're not something that he can just, do a tweet, despite the fact that he seems to have done one today. It's just a tweet. There's no force of law that I'm aware of. Maybe Ankush can explain, whether this is actually a binding message. But my understanding is that all of the other tariff authorities that he has require a lot more process and bureaucracy and notice and comment and hearings and things like that. So they're not as effective of a tool for the president can't just deploy it as he likes because he's mad that Brazil is being mean to his buddy Bolsonaro, or he's mad at Canada for having an ad that uses the words of Ronald Reagan. There has to be actual due process here. And so it will be less effective.
So, Ankush, we have Trump who has responded to this ruling. He's gotten into personal attacks on the justices that he appointed, and the traditionally conservative Wall Street Journal says it was arguably the worst moment of his presidency. Here's some of that.
I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country.
Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, are you surprised in particular by their decision today? And do you regret nominating them?
I don't want to say whether or not I regret. I think their decision was terrible. Yeah. I think it's an embarrassment to their families. You want to know the truth, the two of them.
Is this presidential public shaming of Supreme Court justices unprecedented?
I've never seen anything like that before. I think it goes way further than any kind of presidential public disapproval of the Supreme Court in recent years. It was very obnoxious, obviously, the way he spoke about people. But, I think the thing to take away would be a couple things. First of all, their legal position was very weak and bad from the start. I've been writing columns for literally over a year about how problematic this policy and legal rationale was. So the fact that he managed to get any justices on board is a reflection of the partisanship that is prevailing it should have been 9-0 against the tariffs. And so, I think, as we were talking about, Catherine, just very briefly, sort of the trade deals and negotiations, one thing I just would like people to bear in mind is that for the last year plus, the president and his top advisors have been going all over the world, making threats against our allies and adversaries based on an illegal tool, one that was plainly illegal, a mini trade specialist. They kept going after court, told them that they were wrong. Republicans in Congress would have been up in arms if a Democratic president had behaved like that with pending litigation and a controversial policy initiative that has been widely disliked by the American public the whole time. This has been a really remarkable, I think, political and diplomatic debacle that I think we're only going to start to feel the effects of. And last but not least, we're in the middle of the midterm season here. So, he's going to be doing all of these things. A bunch of the investigations that Catherine alluded to have already begun. These things are going to start to kick in. But it is going to become very apparent to American voters, I think, that the tariffs are there because of Trump and the Republican Party by November.
Ankush, do you think he persisted because he relied on the Supreme Court to do as they have done so often, particularly through shadow docket rulings, They agree with him.
Well,
He accepted them.
I'll do you one better. The Supreme Court immunity ruling, right? Three of the judges who sided against him yesterday sided with him, granting him criminal immunity, a terrible historic mistake and a god-awful decision. But you can see why he might have thought, oh, the same crew that effectively bailed me out of prison will help me out here. Now, it is a reflection of how ridiculous this legal argument was that he could not keep even that coalition together.
Quick answer to what happens with the trade deals. Are they locked in? Are countries going to get refunds?
Are countries going to get refunds?
Countries.
Well, no. I mean, the tariffs have been remitted by U.S. importers. So the whole idea that other countries were paying the tariffs was nonsense from the get-go. They are literally paid by American companies or companies that are bringing things to our shores. Now, maybe some of those other countries or companies in other countries, suppliers in other countries might have decided to agree to share some of the burden. You know, maybe they would lower some of their costs. They're not going to get any of that back. Okay. But the actual money that was paid by American companies on our shores, and then they would either pass along those costs to their downstream companies like consumers, or they would try to work out a deal with companies abroad. But either way, no, they're not getting the money back.
It's a big no. Okay. No, in terms of no way do I not want to have you guys on again. Thank you so much. And Koush Kardori and Catherine Rampell.